Hi everybody. Today I am answering the question, why expert witnesses are helpful for caregiver abuse and neglect cases of older adults and the elderly. I receive comments and texts and have discussions with caregivers all the time about caregiver abuse and neglect in respect to older adults, aging parents, spouses, grandparents, who may be cared for in a private home by family members or paid caregivers, or who may live in a care community like a small board and care home, assisted living, memory care, or a nursing home. And even sometimes by a family caregiver who has legal responsibility. Many of these caregivers have concerns about whether care is appropriate, whether caregivers are doing a good job, why loved ones aren't getting needed care, and they're really not sure what to do. Some caregivers have complained and their complaints haven't been responded to appropriately. I know sometimes family members get involved with Adult Protective Services and the police, and that can be a very difficult situation. But let's be honest, this is a very difficult and a very emotional topic that it's difficult to talk about, that people don't want to talk about, and many times people don't know what to do. But unfortunately, it does happen, and probably more often than you might imagine. It can be different when it happens in a care community because the person is not living in your home. Now, when it happens in your home and you have paid caregivers coming in, or it's a family caregiver, that can be even emotionally distressing because it's happening in a family home. A lot of caregivers will come to me and they'll say, well, is this valid? How do I know if I should complain? If I complain, what do I do? What if it's a family member who is the abuser? Is there anything that can be done, or should children just turn the way and put blinders on if the abuse is happening and ignore it because doing something would be emotionally difficult? They may not want to go against family members. But really, should it be ignored if a loved one is being abused and neglected? I personally would say no. So in this video, stay with me, I'm going to share stories of my personal involvement in cases of elder abuse and neglect as an expert witness in court proceedings. These stories may be helpful for you in figuring out whether you have a valid concern, whether it's worth seeking legal advice just to see if anything can be done. Because I can tell you that I have served and I continue to serve as an expert witness in cases all over the country to help families in these legal cases look at the duty and the responsibility of care by in-home care agencies and home care agencies and care communities, because sometimes family members do suffer needless neglect, needless harm, needless energy because of the actions of care agencies and care staff. Below, underneath this video in the comment section, I will put a link to a page on my website that talks a little bit about elder abuse and neglect and working with elder law attorneys and personal injury attorneys, because many times families do need someone like myself who is an expert witness to support the cases. So if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm Pamela D. Wilson. I am a caregiving expert, advocate, and a speaker who helps aging adults and their caregivers work through health, financial, family concerns, legal concerns, all related to caregiving and healthcare and navigating healthcare systems. You can learn more about me and my professional experience below this video. You'll find links to my website in my bio, links to schedule a one-to-one consultation with me. Please do like this video, follow my channel, share these videos, and comment even if it's only to say thank you. You're more than welcome to share your personal story below. Your comments and your participation helps other people throughout the world find these videos. So let's start by me giving you examples of elder abuse and neglect in some categories. Because elder abuse and neglect can be emotional or psychological. It can be physical. There can be abuse with finances. There can be self-neglect concerns, older people not taking care of themselves because they lack the insight, and also family threats of abandonment. So the emotional and physical abuse, the signs of this can be being isolated from friends or family. You have a loved one who lives at home and maybe there is a paid caregiver there, maybe it's family caregiver, or your loved one lives in a care community and someone controls who gets to visit. You call and you can never speak to this person. You're not allowed to visit. That loved one doesn't even have a telephone that they can make calls out, or if there are calls made, maybe these calls are supervised. And that means that you can't say what you'd like to say, and your loved one can't complain if there are issues. So, client circumstance of mine. I had a client who, before I was involved, was kept at home by a family member and actually locked in her bedroom when this family member left, because the family member didn't want my client leaving or going anywhere. There were some concerns about dementia. Maybe she would get out of the house and get lost. But even worse, this client had no access to a telephone. She couldn't call and talk to anybody. And because the room was locked, if something happened, if the house caught on fire, she would never be able to get out. So while this family member really thought they were keeping their loved one safe, they were locking them in a house that they couldn't get out of. And they weren't allowing them to talk to outside people about concerns. And come to find, this family member had committed a lot of financial abuse when an attorney and the police and I got involved. There's other threats of abandonment. So, your mom or dad lives at home with one of your brothers or sisters, and your brothers or sisters threaten your parents by saying, well, if you don't behave or you tell anybody about what's going on here, I'm going to leave you and nobody is going to take care of you. There are even situations where family members don't appropriately feed loved ones or give them medications or schedule and take them to necessary doctor appointments. These are all signs of abuse and neglect. There can be the same issues with caregivers coming into the home and caregivers in communities who can be verbally threatening. I have been involved in situations where caregivers in a community where my client lived engaged in behaviors that I call triangulation. So maybe the caregiver would say, oh, Miss Smith, Pamela, your power of attorney or your guardian, she's not nice and not allowing you to do this, right? And if I wasn't allowing my client to do something, it was probably because of a health issue or something. And I'll use a simple example, but I had a client who was horribly diabetic, and she was allergic to chocolate, but she loved to eat chocolate. So I told the caregivers, you can't ever give her chocolate, right? They would give her chocolate. She would end up in the hospital and the emergency room, and there would be medical bills. And so it was almost like the staff at the care community pitted my client over here against me over here, who had a responsibility to her health and well-being and keeping her out of the hospital, where their actions were actually giving her something that would make her sick and send her to the hospital. Crazy situations happen like this all the time. I've also been involved in legal situations where I was a court-appointed guardian, and the staff at a care community tried to prevent me from moving my client out of that community because I had proof that their care staff was neglecting my client. and they didn't want anybody to know, and they certainly didn't want to lose $7,000 a month in income. There are other situations of physical abuse that can be seen through broken bones or bruises or falls or cuts or injuries or bed sores. And this can happen anywhere. It can happen in a private home, a private care situation. It can happen in a care community. I've been involved in many spousal abuse situations where one spouse is physically abusing the other or neglecting the other person. So one situation was I had caregivers going into the home of a client to kind of supervise and provide care. And the caregivers would report to me that the client had bruises and she had fallen the day before. And the wife would say, well, don't cross my husband. He can be pretty mean, or, he'll hit you. And a couple of times she was hospitalized from broken bones and an accidental fall where her husband probably got angry and pushed her. There are also situations of what I call unintentional neglect, but it's still neglect. So one spouse caring for another spouse. One spouse may have Alzheimer's or dementia, memory loss. The other spouse may have their own health problems, but they're having a very difficult time caring for themselves and for the spouse who needs a lot of care. They need 24-hour care. They can never be left alone. They need to be fed and changed, and their laundry needs to be done, and all of this. And the healthier caregiver honestly is just worn out. They're too tired to take this person to the doctor, too tired to give them medications, too tired to go to the grocery store and shop, so there's no food in the house. And in some cases, children may be witnessing this and not do anything because they don't want their parents to be mad at them, or they don't want to interfere, they don't want to have family disagreements. This is still abuse and neglect, and if you are somebody witnessing this, you are a party to that abuse and neglect if you don't do anything. Other situations. I have been in situations where a caregiver coming into the home or a caregiver in a community got very close to one of my clients. One time, they even took my client to the county clerk's office and had them sign a marriage license because they were interested in my client's money and wanted to control the life of my client. These crazy things do happen. Let's talk a little bit more about neglect and what neglect looks like. So, as in some of the examples I gave, neglect can be somebody who's dehydrated, somebody who's malnutrition, a parent who's going to the emergency room week after week after week because a caregiver isn't taking care of them or they're not getting appropriate medical care. Now, in defense of caregivers, I will say many times caregivers don't know how to manage these situations. They don't know what they should be doing with doctors or the healthcare system. Maybe they don't trust doctors or the healthcare system. I consult with individuals and families to work through these situations so that a caregiver isn't unintentionally abusing a loved one just because they don't know any better. I also consult with families and older adults where neglect and abuse is happening, and family members know that they should do something, but they don't quite know what to do. So, more signs of neglect. Losing weight, dirty clothing, not receiving appropriate medical care, poor hygiene, hair not washed, teeth not brushed, fingernails, toenails that are just ungodly long, an unclean or an unsafe living situation. You go over the house and there's dirty dishes in the sink and the bathroom's not cleaned, or there's junk all over the place, or there's hoarding, mice, bed bugs. A person who needs care, who relies on somebody for hands-on care, is vulnerable, right? A parent who needs help to go to the bathroom or to bathe or do any of those things can face neglect. Any type of sores on the body that do not heal can grow into unbelievably serious bed sores that can go bad very quickly. And many older adults with dementia do need special care or additional care with daily activities. I had a client who lived in a memory care community, and on several occasions I would show up to visit her at lunchtime, And she was the only person sitting in this dining room. No other residents there, no care staff to even be found. And she would be sitting in her chair with a plate of food in front of her that was cold. Now, seriously, she's paying to be there. She's paying to be cared for by the care staff. She's paying to make sure that she has good nutrition. Seriously, could someone not make sure that she ate even if they had to sit with her and feed her, which is what I did many times before I moved her out of this care community. Neglect in memory care communities and nursing homes happens more easily because many of these people can't speak up. They can't report what's happening, or they're afraid to report what's happening because they don't want to have care staff or the management staff be angry at them, or they're worried that they're going to get worse care. And family members actually have the same worries. So unless you as a family caregiver or a family member is overseeing care, whether it's in the home, in a care community, anywhere else, if you're not paying close attention, you may not notice signs of abuse and neglect. And maybe you do notice the signs, but you have no idea what to do about them. Let me throw a little wrench in here, and it's called patient rights. There is a law, rule, whatever, in many states saying that patients have a right to refuse care. Now, that gets complicated when a loved one who has maybe dementia, or they're forgetful, or they're sick and they really can't manage care and they don't make the best decisions, says no to things that would be good for them. So a caregiver can say, oh, Mrs. Smith, do you want to eat today? And the caregiver's like, Mrs. Smith is like, no. Mrs. Smith, do you want to bathe today? Oh, no, I'm a little tired today. I don't want to bathe. Now, these care staff have a duty and a responsibility to provide care. So if someone says no, they should come back and ask them again. So another example, I went to go visit a client who was in assisted living, and I usually like to show up around mealtime. So I showed up at about 11:30 and my client was still in bed, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Why are you still in bed? Do you not feel well? And she's like, oh, I just didn't feel well. So I went to the care staff because I kept some things on the card. I kept a pulse oxygen machine because my client had breathing issues. And I kept a blood pressure cuff and things like that. So I went to the chart and I'm like, hey, can I have this? I want to go check my client. And by the way, did she not get up for breakfast this morning? And the caregiver's like, oh, she told me she was too tired, so I just let her sleep. So go back to my client's room, take her pulse oxygen, take her blood pressure. Pulse ox is really low and blood pressure is not good either. I asked her if she felt weak, if she was having breathing problems. She said, yeah, she looked a little gray. So we called 911. Ended up, she had a bronchial infection. She had pneumonia. She was treated. But had I not shown up, and those caregivers went in to ask her to go to lunch, and she said, oh, I'm not feeling well. I'm too tired. And the caregivers didn't think to ask, well, exactly how are you not feeling well? Should we do something about this? If they hadn't gone to consult their supervisors, my client probably would have been seriously ill by 5 o'clock that day. And even if she was sent to the emergency room, she probably would have died. And nobody would have known the difference if I didn't show up. Now, as a caregiver, or as a legally responsible party, power of attorney, guardian, you can also put notes in the chart that say, look, if this happens, I want an immediate phone call. Okay, so you don't have to be there every minute. You just need people who are going to call you if something unusual happens. Caregivers do have a duty to ask a client or a patient if they don't feel well, or if a client isn't using their walker and the caregiver knows the client should use their walker. The caregiver should say, I'm responsible for you if you fall. Can you help me out and let's use the walker, and I'll walk by you and I'll use the gait belt and do all these things to make sure that you're safe, because we certainly don't want you to have to fall and you might leave and break a hip and have to go to the hospital. And why go through all that if we can just work together on this? So there are some times where a little bit of thinking and a little bit of I have a duty and a responsibility to provide care can go a long way instead of just accepting a no. So let's talk about family members who see this abuse and they don't do anything, or even a friend or somebody else, right? Neighbors, for heaven's sakes. Family members sometimes may not do something because they may think, well, I should have noticed this before. I should have reported it more. And now it's like really gotten bad. And oh my gosh, I feel like I'm going to be in trouble if I say something. Well, if you've done everything right and you haven't committed any abuse yourself, by reporting abuse, you're not going to be in trouble. You're probably not going to be in trouble, okay? Sometimes family members also don't want to stir up the pot or mix the waters, right? You don't want to make a report to a care agency because you don't want to get the caregiver in trouble because your parents like the caregiver, or you don't want to complain about staff in the care community because, again, they all work so hard and they're stressed out, and you're trying to make excuses for why your loved one should not get the care that you're paying for or the care that they deserve. Stop making excuses. Older people, older adults deserve care. They deserve dignity. And this is the same thing. If you have a parent who's neglecting your other parent, you have to do something. So, similar to care providers who can say, well, the patient said no, or family caregivers who asked mom or dad, well, do you want me to do something about this? And your parent with dementia says no, because they don't know what they're saying. You have a responsibility, especially if you're a legal responsible party, like an agent under power of attorney. You have a legal responsibility to do the right thing. Seriously, would you, if you were in this situation, not want somebody to step up and help you? Do you think your aging parent who has dementia would not say to you, oh my gosh, if this ever happens to me, step in, do something. Don't let my care be neglected. And then on the other hand, if a caregiver, in-home care, care community, wherever, does something that harms your loved one, honestly, are you worried more about hurting their feelings and getting them into trouble? Or should you be worried more about the fact that your loved one needs good care and something can happen if their care is neglected or they're harmed? So not wanting to make a big deal about something can be more about you and your fears than doing the right things. And I'll be honest, there are staffing shortages out there. I've seen care agencies and care communities hire like that without thoroughly doing background checks of employees who had criminal records. I've seen care agencies and care communities hire like that without training their staff. Who suffers? It's usually your parents, your grandparents, you. You suffer because these agencies are not thorough in following standard policies and procedures to make sure that you and your loved ones are cared for in an appropriate manner and cared for safely. Ignoring these little things can lead to big problems later on. As a family member, as even a caregiver, watching other caregivers commit abuse, you have to report it. You have to be the squeaky wheel. Someone has to speak up for people that cannot speak up for themselves. Don't let it go, because if you let it go, something horrible may happen and it can be too late. So, what do? There are options. Family members can make reports to Adult Protective Services and the police if you're afraid of confronting your family members directly. Sometimes, though, these organizations, they can be too busy to investigate your case, or they may have 20 other cases that the abuse seems way worse, and so yours gets put on hold. So again, delaying can cause problems. You can make written and verbal complaints to home care agencies and care communities. You can go on to the Department of Health and make written complaints and request investigations, but know that these investigations can take 3 to 6 months. Your loved one may not have 3 to 6 months. So, what can you do? You can consult with someone like me, who is an expert in this. I help families and individuals talk about situations to find out, are they valid? Are there other things that they would need to know to make a claim? You can also contact elder law attorneys, probate attorneys, estate planning attorneys, personal injury attorneys, who many times will hire or consult with people like me to serve as an expert, because many times it is required by the court system to look at these cases and see if there was abuse or if there was neglect or if the care agencies really acted appropriately or if family members acted appropriately. The biggest piece of advice I can give you is if you suspect abuse, if you see abuse, if you're concerned, don't wait. Do something about it, whatever that is. Make a report to the police, make a report to Adult Protective Services, complain to the care agency, the care company, consult with a person like me, hire an attorney to investigate it. Do something before something more serious happens to your loved one. I thank you all so much for being here. I'm Pamela D. Wilson. I'm a caregiving expert, witness, advocate, and speaker. More information about me is below. Please like this video, share this video, like my channel, comment below, even if it's only to say thanks. Your participation helps other people find their way here.